Therefore, he doesn't have to obey what God says. I don't read that in the Bible. I think that's kind of nonsense. But I've heard that stuff. But David is praying so that other people are hearing, and I'm wondering if he's starting to move away from his isolation. He's praying out loud so other people can start to become involved so he doesn't feel all alone anymore. He is taking a step towards this understanding that God is there, and then he will also take a step to understanding that all kinds of people are there for him as well. But he starts using his voice, I believe, to tell us that he is moving from isolation. And then he talks, I don't know if he talks to God here. He talks to God, but he really doesn't ask him for anything. He's still waiting on that. He's talking at God right now. He says, when my spirit grows faint within me, it's you who know my way. In the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. Look to my right and see. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. Both verses allude to what God knows and what David knows. God knows that David's in trouble, that people are out to get him. David knows that God is there, but that he seems to be absent from him. Usually God's knowledge is a comfort. Sometimes it's a curse. In the Great Commission where he says, "Lo, I am with you always," if you're doing what is good, his presence is a blessing. If you're doing what is bad, his presence is a curse. Because God cannot stand to be in the same place as evil. But God knows us. And he knows what we're going through. And David is applying that to his life, applying that to his isolation. But before he gets there, he asks God to look at his right hand, where a powerful supporter should be, where his right hand man should be, where his right hand God should be. And David says, there's no one there. There's no one there. Men have hidden a snare for me. You can't really see that snare. Shelter has vanished. This tree has just demolished this house. It is just gone. God should be looking for me, but he isn't. No one is concerned for me. God doesn't even care. I have no refuge. God has disappeared. As he complains to God, as he brings that to God, he feels that God has left him. Not only does God not care, but everybody else listening doesn't care either. That's what he feels like in this world. He says, I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am desperate in need. He's beginning now to talk to God and to ask God for help. Now he's talking to God and asking God for something. Before he's just been sort of talking at God. Before that he wasn't even, he was talking to other people. He has started now to focus in on God. But in the absence of any shelter, that's what he said before. Now he says that God is his refuge. In spite of his feelings, he knows the fact. God is with him, and he's going to hang on to that. In Israel, everybody had an inheritance. Everybody had a portion. For those of you who don't recognize that shack, that building, you recognize that building? That's Homestead Monument, right? They got a portion. They got an inheritance. They got land. Well, in Israel, everybody had a piece of land. It was inherited from their fathers and grandfathers and great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers. And they always kept that. Well, David is saying that God is David's inheritance, that God is David's portion, that God is David's land. And David can live in God and be in God forever and ever, because David will always have God by his side. At least that's the theory. I don't know if you can see this woman. The theory is she has an umbrella and she's walking off the house. Theoretically, that should hold you up. I've seen Mary Poppins do it. The theory should be good, shouldn't it? It should hold you up. And I think this is what David is feeling right about now in this psalm. The theory is that God will always be there for him, but it doesn't feel like it when you're falling to the ground with your umbrella streaming out of you. David says, I'm in desperate need. Literally, he says, I have been brought very low. He has been brought to the point of hell, to the point of Sheol, the pit. They viewed this as a low-down place. And David's saying, I am right next door to leaving this world. My place in the land of the living is very precarious. You know, I'm standing at death's door and the other foot's on a banana peel, or however that phrase goes. And then, therefore, David appeals to God to act. At last, the psalm comes to the point. God, help me. You know, and it takes a while. If you've ever gone through a time of depression, it takes time. It also takes a choice. When we ask God to help, that is important. We need to turn that corner and go to the Lord and say, God, I need your help. Whether it's depression or it's disease or whether it's loneliness or whether it's whatever situation you're going through. We need to turn the corner and come to God and say, God, help me. Those words, pursue and rescue me, come. That should be 1 Samuel 22. He says he's in prison. In case you've never visited, this is TSCI. This is one of the housing units. Very nice, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to have those dining room chairs in your dining room? Bruce could probably arrange that. No. He says he's in prison, but there are many kinds of prisons. I don't think David was in prison at this time. The prison is a place where someone seems to be given over to their enemies. A prison is where other people are in charge. A prison can be inside your own mind. It can be inside your life. It can be inside your family. It can be where other people are, but you feel like there's no escape and no help. And he says, set me free from my prison that I may praise your name. He wants God to receive the glory. And so he's saying, God, come and act on my behalf. One of the things that motivates God is his own glory. And when we promise that we will bring God glory, he comes to our rescue. The righteous will gather about me. Remember, he was so isolated earlier? Now the righteous are gathering around him because of God's goodness. When God answers prayer, people sit up and notice. And they recognize. And they start to pay more attention to God. And God is glorified. And they gather around. God brings us from those places of isolation to these places where God's people congregate and praise his name. Contrast with the isolation back in verse 4. God is with David, and so are the people. David has come from being totally alone, whether it was just in his mind or whether it was in actuality, to a place where God's people are all around him. The question before us this morning in this psalm is, how does prayer work? What motivates God to respond? How can we get God to respond?